Hey crew, today on the Rev Up we have my very, very good friend Mr. Hugh Hall. Hugh is the founder and owner of in-flow.com.au, who essentially are a consultancy who can help you to learn how to sell better, manage, create, build your sales processes, but then also be the link that helps you to take that sales process and implement it into your business. Make sure that it is being utilized throughout your CRM and your process flows and all of those sorts of things so that what you design as a sales process actually happens in reality. Hugh and I worked together for years. He is a very good friend of mine and one of the best sales brains that I know. We initially in our lives when we first met, really connected over a love of reading and learning, and have spent years swapping books and ideas. The Rev Up, as always, is brought to you by Trust the Process. Trust the Process is the preferred partner for offshoring to the Philippines. Any work where you need help to be able to find staff to do marketing, sales, service type roles, but also if you need help to implement things like HubSpot, you can go to our website at ttprocess.co, and all roads lead to Rome. Fill in any form there and you'll be able to speak to one of the team. So over to Hugh and myself. Really looking forward to sharing this conversation with you. Welcome to the Rev Up. Hugh Hall, gentleman, scholar, rogue. Anything else I've missed there?
No, that is bang on. That is bang on accurate. That is exactly it. Uh,
Good to have you here, my friend. We obviously know
Super
each other
pumped.
very well.
Yeah,
Good friends, former colleagues,
yeah,
mutual lovers of all things sales and
and
psychology and
100%.
learning.
Yeah,
Yep. Obviously, we've been wanting to do this for a while. We've been talking about it for a while, so super glad to have you on the show. For the sake of our listeners, why don't you give us a little bit of background on what you're doing, what you're up to, kind of where you come from? Let's talk through the Hugh Hall story and how we got to this point here.
yeah, yeah. I'd love to. So, I just thinking from the very very beginning, it was just like how did it all kick off? But like the funniest thing was that this was a complete deviation of where I originally set out to be, right? So the original plan for me was go and be a policeman, believe it or not. Like that was going to be,
Oh,
yeah, that was going to be the career, right? Like go into law enforcement. So went to university, studied that, and then worked out why people do bad things. And I was like, this is okay, this is pretty full on. And during that time, I was learning all about behavioral psychology and criminology and applied psychology and like why people do things. And at that time, I was working in sales. And then I kind of pulled bits out and went, oh, I really like this. And I just never
yeah.
stopped. And then I finished that up and I went, yeah, I'm going to stay in sales. I can like this is way more fun. Much to the annoyance of mum and dad, who are like, no, 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 go and do that and get the degree and go and do. And it's like, oh, yeah, no, I'm okay. I'll just carry on doing sales. And I just started out as you do, just doing the random retail sales, and then from there I went into insurance, which is about as
Mm.
exciting to sell as paint. Um, and
It's a
then I
proving
went
ground, though. That's a
it's
tough one.
it is a baptism of fire, like it full on is.
Mm.
It's just insane. Um, and found some rogue units that just work
Mm.
in insurance
I can
sales. Like
imagine.
it's just unreal.
Cowboys running
Oh,
around all over the place.
100%, like 100%. But it was absolute eye opener for me, and it was just I suppose my first kind of foray into I suppose like bigger, broader commercial sales, like going down that. Then came to Australia and did the usual thing of living out of a van for 9 months and went up and down the eastern seaboard and smelt like feet for a while and just carried on selling stuff during that whole time. And
Yeah.
then got to Sydney, found my other half, who was responsible for, I suppose, pretty much everything else that happened since then, and kids and family life, and that's
Mm.
obviously how we crossed paths. But yeah, and then just moved into just more and more different avenues of sales. So then went from insurance to finance, then went into corporate finance, which was like
Yep.
lots of fun. Like in just so like I can't. It's very hard to describe, like in the time that we've got, but it was just a massive eye opener because I was just this guy. I was like, hey, I can sell some stuff really well, and then we moved into like playing with like millions of dollars, and I was like,
Complicated selling. Yeah.
complicated selling.
Yeah.
Like this, the one where it can just deviate like real fast, like off of the straight and narrow, and then you're just trying to pull it back in. And did that, and then moved into did that for a long time, and then decided that I wanted to chill out a little bit more, and moved into um, what I would describe as like small business sales, like B2B sales, when we're
Yep.
playing around with the money's not as big, but it's far more frequent. So
Yep.
there's just like there's a lot of velocity to it, and that was just really exciting. Like there's just tons of stuff there, and it's so mercurial. Like it really does move quite fast, and the conversations are awesome, and some of the outcomes that you craft are really cool. And then you get to go and sell those things, and it was just the thing I absolutely adored about B2B sales, especially in seven and eight figures, like that for me is just I find really, really exciting, really cool, is that it is the definition of just alchemy. You kind of make something out of nothing when you have a solution, and you just pull these things together, and then you have this awesome pathway for someone to go down, and then you have this thing that solves all of these problems, and they're just genuinely so thankful that you have that solution. Like for
Yeah.
me, it was just the best thing. And then I've just been doing that ever since because it's just you kind of catch a bug for it, and it's just fun. It's just cool. The conversations are super rewarding, and it's always exciting to help people kind of go through that pathway to then get that end result.
Yeah. That
And
real
then
middle piece of the SME market, you know,
yeah,
not micro businesses, not pure play startup, like they've got some momentum going. Like
yeah,
you're not steering a parked car. You got a
yeah,
bit of momentum going. That
yeah,
middle space, it really is the most fun to work in, I think, as well. I
hundred
spent years
percent.
working with big businesses. You make someone like, I don't know, Oracle an extra $1 million. Who cares?
Yeah,
Who cares? You make Joe Bloggs in his pest control business an extra $1 million, and you potentially change their life.
100%. Like if you just break it down into like basic maths, Macquarie was doing, 2-3 mil a month, right? Like in sales, like in volume. And
Mm,
for them, they're like, yeah, awesome. Like that's why you're here.
mm.
And then you're like, okay, sweet, awesome. 2 mils, I would
They're
consider
like,
quite,
let me just put that on the pile.
yeah, yeah. They're like,
Put that little bit on the pile, just like a little bit of sprinkling.
yeah, they're like, awesome. The fellas over at RMG are doing triple that. And I'm like, okay, great. Awesome. Uh, thanks, thanks for that. Um, and you do that for someone in the SME space. That's a 20% year on year growth. And they're just like, and it's
Mm,
just like, and it's just awesome to see. You go to someone who's turning over like 10 mil, and you go and bring them a mil in like booked revenue or secured revenue for the year, fundamentally shifts their paradigm. Like it
yep,
really does, give them such an awesome result. And um, that for me, it was just way more rewarding to see that. Like
mm,
you get a really nice buzz, and there's that edification of you as a person's ability as well to help move somebody along. And it's a cliche, but it doesn't mean that it's not correct. In that sales is very much the make or break factor when it comes to a business of that size. Like if you
yep,
mess it up, like the consequences are real. If you mess up sales for a corporate entity, yeah, like they're not going to be happy with you about it, but ultimately, it doesn't really matter. Like you're kind of like, okay, well, I won't do that again. the stakes are very much different when you bring it to a slightly smaller size, right? So
Mm,
there's more impact, but there's also more risk. So it's a kind of
for
balance
sure.
things off. Yeah.
For sure.
Uh,
Um, that sort of path you've taken, as much as it's sort of like, a few different things, you got some pieces in there that, and, tell me if you found this too, some pieces in there that are industries I freaking love hiring from. One of
yeah.
them, and I started here too, after my days of working in pizza kitchens and things as a teenager, retail.
Yeah.
And my main reason why I love hiring people from retail, any time in if someone spent a year in retail when they were 17 years old, that's a plus for me.
Yeah.
Because, number one, if you are in sales in retail, you have learnt how to engage with people that
Yeah.
aren't necessarily very nice to you. and
Yeah.
and how to control your emotions and how to maintain that sort of positive attitude, put the face on, here we go, next person, move on to the next thing. But the other one is anybody who spent any time in retail knows what boredom is and
Hmm.
generally prefers to be active.
Yeah.
And so they find things to do. They
Yeah.
find things to keep moving things forward.
Yeah.
Have you found any of the, insurance obviously is just, that's the hardest of hardcore, like nobody gives a shit except they want to have it in case in the future.
Yeah.
And so it's just like so red brain logical, but you've got to find ways to connect it back to a future that might never come,
Yeah.
or sometimes very morbid things.
Yeah.
How do you think those sort of pieces have kind of served you, and have you seen that too from other people that you've worked with over the years?
Yeah. 100%. Like anyone in retail, they just, they don't love being static. They just
Mm,
can't be static. There was always something, like exactly you said, there's always something to do. They go and find that thing. And it's exactly like cleaning. Like the more you go and look, the more you find, and the more you do, and off you go, and before you realize it. But then conversely, nobody fully understands and appreciates boredom like someone who has worked in retail. Like just that, like
oh my god.
I gotta find something. How many times
Yeah,
can I clean that mirror? Let's go for 10 today.
yeah.
Let's go, right? Because you're always just like, okay, let's keep going. Let's keep finding something. The people who work in retail for a long time are just pros at being like incredibly proactive, like in always finding something to refine. And absolutely, like, to have to be semi good and decent at it, you have to understand how to engage with people who have an insane amount of resistance to being engaged with,
Mm.
like an unbelievably high. Like you can tell it, and they walk in, they're like, don't look at me like that, right? And even if it's simple as just like, hey, how are you? Good morning. I'm looking. Okay, fantastic. Like, just saying
Reminds me of
hello,
that. Did you
because
did you watch Black Books?
yeah, yeah,
It reminds me of there's a Black Books episode where Manny's trying to have a bet about being able to sell books. And he
yeah,
goes over to the customer and he's like, "Can I help you, sir?" And the
yeah,
guy just blasts it. You shall not influence me. One.
yeah,
And his
yeah,
hair's like flipping back in the wind.
yeah,
I always think about that whenever I think about those, like, those tough retail. Like,
100%.
let's flip it for a second.
Yeah,
Everybody, be nice to retail staff. All right,
100%.
just
So
be nice to them.
the surefire way, there are two tried and tested ways for you to gauge the caliber of a human being.
Mm-hmm.
The first is how they engage with somebody, who they engage with somebody in retail,
Mm,
straight away. The second is how they treat their waiter. Like
yep.
those are the two things that you can categorically judge a human being's quality of character by, because they are historically the poor guys that just get annihilated just day in day out. So
Yeah.
like, and also the same for an SDR. Like if you have an SDR
Yep.
and and you hear someone take that sales call and they're just genuinely polite and courteous, not to the point where they move into something that they shouldn't, but if they just treat that person with courtesy, um, especially in Australia with offshore with like Filipino SDRs, because there's a bit of resistance to be engaged with people from offshore. I've noticed from the Australian market. But if you can see someone engage with them, they're polite, they're courteous, and they're super professional, like that that's a semi decent human being.
Yep.
Like
Absolutely.
that's the surefire way. That's always kind of led me pretty true with like engaging the type of person that I'm talking to. Like get them to have a chat to one of my SDRs, and if they're nice, they'll be like, okay, yeah, cool, you can come along. Like we can have a chat.
Oh
Yeah,
man, I saw the other day. I'm always following people that talk particularly about SDR stuff.
yeah,
For those listening who don't know what an SDR is, sales development representative. This is essentially your like outbound BD stuff.
yeah,
Um, some of the appointment setting stuff, but really it's more about like nurturing and developing leads to till
yeah,
they're sales ready. Um, I saw somebody the other day talking about this like nice customers thing, and they made a suggestion that I was like, that is freaking genius, which was if you're ever listening to calls or one of your team is like, oh, I spoke to someone that was so nice. They didn't want to buy from us, but they were so nice. Um, they suggested they were going to try reaching out to that person and just thanking them for being nice,
yeah,
right? Just
yeah,
reaching out and being like, hey, we speak to a lot of people, and some of our team members, they don't always get treated super nice, blah, blah, blah. Just want to say I heard the call that you were on with Bob, and really appreciate when people are super nice to our team.
yeah.
You were respectful and nice and all those sort of things. And so I just wanted to reach out and say thank you as a way to show what kind of company you are and also re-engage with that person. Like if they're a
That's
perfect fit prospect, I thought that was
such a
genius.
good idea. I am stealing that. I'm 100% doing that because the offshore team just sometimes get like annihilated. Like bless them, they have. Um, so I've tried to reshape the role that we have with what we do to make it more glamorous is the wrong word, but to really hit home how vital it is as a business unit, like to
Mm,
really, really make sure that not only company wide that we're in line with how we view that particular unit, but also from a customer facing perspective. Like we call them rock stars. We call them rock stars for a particular reason because they are absolute rock stars with what they do. Like it's so integral to the smooth running of everything. And they should be. I've always been a big advocate, and this was actually something that you taught me back when we were working really closely together. Is that something like that from a sales perspective, you're only as good as your weakest link, and sometimes the weakest link is the first point of contact that people have with you. You need to make sure that that is just it's just airtight, and they do get chewed up. Just and they're in the business of interrupting. Like that's ultimately what they do. They interrupt people's day to have a conversation around some sort of trigger event, some sort of metric, some sort of thing that's happened, and their purpose is to reach out and to engage. And some people get, especially in the small business world, because of how hectic it is, forget that they are in the business of interrupting people, and they are in the business of not vying for attention, but competing for it a little bit, and trying to get the conversations going and get them galvanized. So when you genuinely have somebody who not only is pleasant enough about having their day interrupted by some random person that they have never met before, and they can be civil and professional and conscientious about that interaction, 100% bring them back afterwards and just be like, just want to know, we highly appreciate how you interacted with that team. Would love to send you a bottle of wine, like
mm,
just as a thank you, like from us to you. Like that's wonderful. We wish we had more engagements like that. Sadly, that's
yep.
not the nature of the thing. um, on the back of that bottle of wine is a QR code to book in for a meeting with me, so we can have a chat. There you go, something like that. just be super cheeky about it.
Just a
But
little
yeah.
extra CTA on the back end. I like it.
Just a little CTA incentivized by alcohol. You can't really go wrong. But,
I've never done a QR code on a bottle of wine CTA. I've sent many, many, many bottles of wine in my career, but never with a QR code on the back. That'll have to be a first for sure.
I might just try that out and just be like, see how we go.
I always like
Yeah.
to joke around with stuff like that. I remember years ago I was working with a big construction company for a series of construction events, and their
Yeah.
CEO was essentially like chairing our events and really helping us out a lot. And
Yeah.
I asked him what kind of wine he's into to send him something,
Yeah. Yeah.
and he said, I'm not very picky. I just like really good quality red wine and
Yep.
large volumes of it. And so and so I sent him
Excellent.
one really nice bottle of wine and then also a cask of wine to
Yeah.
cover both bases, and he loved it and stuck around for forever. So this essentially takes us to the point where we kind of started talking about some of the things you're doing now. Particularly
Yes. Yeah.
around that SDR piece. Why don't
Yeah.
you share a little bit of what you're working on now
Yeah.
and what you're finding?
Yeah. So the main focus for me at the moment is that I realize that just from a combination of doing everything that I've been doing for the last 5 or so years, it's just I realized that there's such a gap between putting the right steps or putting the right infrastructure in place with a lot of smaller businesses. And when I say smaller businesses, I mean sort of the SME bracket, especially in 6 and 7 figures, in that they conceptually understand what's needed from I suppose a sales unit perspective, but the understanding, the implementation are just a little bit they're a little bit fractured. They don't necessarily align. So some of the things that I've been working on really recently is just going, okay, well, what does good look like here? Like what's efficient, what's simple. Right? When you have a lot of people come and have conversations with me about creating this just phenomenally like this beast of a sales function. It's like it doesn't need to be that hard. Like it doesn't have to be that complicated. Like it needs to be simple. It needs to be efficient. And then once you've got that infrastructure and you've got that foundational growth, or those pillars nailed, then just pop skilled resource over the top, and the skilled resource over the top can be just trained. Give me somebody give me somebody who has a genuine appetite to learn and understand something. The rest is all gravy. You can teach product, you can teach a script, you can teach a framework. Just come into it with the right attitude. And I find that if you blend those two things together, you actually have a really efficient sales process. You have really efficient steps. And I think that's been missed by a lot of people because they think I just need someone to come here and sell my thing.
Mm,
And that's part of the equation, because what they do is they throw somebody at a problem, makes the problem 10 times worse, because they're trying to basically drive a parked car, right? That is like,
yep.
why isn't it going anywhere? And it's like, well, if you just take a step back, we just look at it, just even it out a little bit, put some decent steps in place, just make sure that it's effective. It doesn't have to be perfect, because there's no such thing as perfect sales process. It doesn't exist. Right. Even it gets out the gate at 60%, like that's good. Like that's a really
Mm,
good place to start. Like that, because the nuances and the hyper efficiency and the super performance all kick in after a while of testing, right? Like you just refine and off you go. So the core focus for me for the last, however long, where are we now? Been sort of 8, 9 months. Is looking at this and going, okay, cool. Well, what's missing here? Like what are these businesses ultimately struggling with? And it is finding the right marriage of having people and process together, like working in
yep.
harmony to effectively sell their thing, like sell their product. And what a lot of these businesses have, especially in service-based world, they have awesome products. Like they have these really, really cool solutions, but they don't know how to sell it past them doing it. They just don't have a clue
Mm.
because they've been in product world for forever. They know what delivery looks like, and they can just on the fly just go, oh yeah, we can do that, or yeah, that sounds right, or we can do this, and they haven't sat and just zoomed out for a little bit and go, actually, how do I get somebody else to sell this for me? Like, how do I get somebody else who's got no visibility over what I do to sell this thing? And that's such a big disconnect that is
Yeah.
actually a really easy thing to plug once you look at it for more than 30 seconds and you just go, and it
I don't
sounds
know if I agree with you that it's easy to plug.
yeah,
Like building sales processes, I think it is a skill in and of itself. Like everything, it's something
yeah,
you can learn. But I don't think it necessarily always comes easy to everyone. Like if you've
no,
been in it
no,
for a
that's true.
long time, like you coming through from, and same for me, from having been a salesperson for a long time
Yeah,
through into leadership roles and getting involved in the tech and all of those things. And at some point, you start to really see things that work and don't work so many times that you can start to kind of figure out how the pieces move. But
yeah,
like that piece
yeah,
the piece you're talking about there in terms of like it being so critical, like this is part of the reason why we are working together again now,
yeah,
right? Like have started referring our clients to you because we're an offshore provider for the most part, where we have people and we can provide amazing people. But we get so many people that come to us and they say, "Oh, I just want somebody to do my sales for me."
yeah,
Okay, what's the process? Well, they make outbound calls and they
mm,
convince them to buy.
yeah,
It's like, okay, that's not really a process. And so,
yeah,
we
yeah,
say to people all the time, you never offshore, never outsource a problem, always outsource a process.
yeah,
And so the way we work together now is that if I get somebody that doesn't have anything in place, we send them to you first.
yeah,
They go through a process with you, get something in place, and then they can hire staff offshore to go and do portions of that. And obviously, some of them
yeah,
onshore to do portions
yeah,
of that through you.
yeah,
So, talk to me a bit about, right? You go in to a business that doesn't have all of the things that they need in place,
yeah,
right? They're flailing around. They're probably struggling to grow. They might have even hired a salesperson or two that just seem to never work out for some reason.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
what's the like? What's the commandments? You go in there. What's the sort of core pieces? You go in there and you go, I need to look at one, two, three, four. What are the big moving rocks that matter the most when you go into a new business?
Yeah, awesome question. So there are always three key components to it, um, and it's you zoom out and you just go, okay, what mechanics have you got? Like what infrastructure? What's there? Like, and we take this right back to a basic level. Do you have a CRM? Yes or no? Like, do you have something that people come into and you have visibility over what their experience is like through a sales function? And 9 times out of 10, um, they do have something, but
Mm,
more often than not, it's some sort of Frankenstein monster that's been created off of the back of marketing software, for example, right? Like Active Campaigns is a great example, or Go High Level is a great example of this, right? Like smashing bits of kit, but not necessarily really well suited as a sales function arm or a sales function. It
yep.
has that functionality, like you can create it to do that. But I think there are just better alternatives out there when you look at it. So more often than not, we'll start there. We go, okay, let's just do a full like stop start. You have somebody who comes in through the door and they go, "Hey Ben, I love what you've got. I want it." And you go, "Okay, cool. What are the steps from there? What does that conversation look like? Like what steps do they have to go through? Like how do you guide them through that?" And it's super common that there isn't a cohesive or a clear answer around that.
Yeah, so common.
Um, and they go, "Oh, I just know how to talk about it," and then they buy. And we go, "Okay, cool. That's the problem. It's straight away. That's the issue. In that, the first thing is no one is ever going to be able to sell the thing as well as the founder, like ever,
Mm,
because it just. And I was having this conversation with somebody the other day who was he sells safety programs. He sells safety programs into construction companies and things like that. It's like Lend-Lease. And they're normally 20, 30 grand a pop, like they're large things. And he converts at like 90%. And he didn't realize that in order for him to scale past this point, because he'd hit a saturation of he sells and he delivers, he would have to hand off some of the sales and then focus on his delivery. But he was unwilling to do that because his hit rate was so high. And I just said to him, it's like, Rob, that's going to be the cycle now. Unless you give or start to alleviate one of these functions slightly, you're not going to be able to step well or grow past this because it's just a simple input output equation. And he was like, okay, cool. Well, I don't want to sacrifice my hit rate. I'm happy where I am, so I'll just stay. It's like, that's fine if you want to just stay in this space, but you just be cognizant of the fact that you're going to really struggle to move past where you are. And I think he was at about 300K in revenue. So it's super common that they don't necessarily have the right mechanics in place, which is just the infrastructure. That could be a CRM, that could be a process, that could be just a bit of tech that shows a clear entry point and a clear exit point for someone to either convert or not. That's the first thing. And then you drill down a little bit deeper. You go, okay, cool. What are the dynamics of this? Like, how, like, do you do it, or do you have a salesperson do it, or like, what's the soft skill component here? Like, do you have a framework? Do you have a script? Do you have a structure to these sessions, or are they just you show up, you talk to them for an hour, and they close or they don't? Like, is that what you have to work with? Because if that's the case, you need to formalize that a little bit more, and you need to chunk it so that you know exactly why you're saying something at that given moment, because it's designed for an outcome. Like, and we have to be able to then control the person through those steps to then facilitate a result. And that result, you need to take a step away from and understand that it's not about having a positive or negative result. It's about just getting the result. And that's something that I think a lot of people find quite challenging, especially in sales, because ultimately when you look at a salesperson, a sales function, you're weighted on your ability to get a financial result, right? So that's when you know you're good at it. But what a lot of people struggle with is that if we put it as a customer-centric perspective, we look at that person or the client going through it, they just need to know what's right for them. They just need to know what their best next step is in terms of, getting started, moving into your program or moving into your solution or moving into another one. And if you can help or not, and if you can help guide them to that realization, then you've done the best thing. You've done the right thing. If you have a good product and you have a good strong message, more often than not, you're going to be able to help that person. But it's much better to be able to guide somebody through it and get them to an outcome where everyone agrees that it's not the right thing, rather than you selling to that person. They get involved with what you do and it be the wrong fit, because then you just have, like, it's a can of worms, a whole host of things. So the second thing is you look at the dynamics and you go, okay, well, what do we have that sits over that process? Like, what sits over those stages, and how effective was it? And then the last thing is, okay, cool. Let's look at the product. Let's get really, really clear on the thing. Let's get really, really clear so that if I know that I have this type of person, the majority of the time, this solution is going to be right for them. The majority of the time. There's going to be variables that you can't control. There's going to be weird things that show up and you're like, pretty sure that would work for them. But one of the things that we really work hard with a lot of clients is not necessarily the sales process or the mechanics or the dynamics, because that we pretty much have ready to rock and roll. Like, after so long, that there's stuff that just works and there's stuff that just doesn't, and you can almost formulate a winning process that's fairly robust based off of that. The missing link is then, how do you connect that to the product? Like, how do you actually connect that to the actual thing? And it's something that so many people struggle to articulate in a ways, because they know that they can help. They can know that they can look after people with the entirety of their being. They just know that. But where they can't articulate is just I suppose, the specific connections. It's like,
Mm.
and as a result, you tend to have a lot of people who offer everything to everyone because they know that they can do that. Digital agencies are particularly repeat offenders at this. Right? They will have a million different line items from
Here's everything we
PPC.
could do.
This is everything that we could do, and we will create this amazing, bespoke, awesome solution for you that is a logistical nightmare to sell. Because unless you're a subject matter expert on those specific things, it can be really tricky to be able to create the right journey or create the right picture from the outcome. So sometimes it's easier just to go, okay, cool, put it in a bucket and be like, okay, for this type of person, given at this stage, given these challenges, we know that this solution, which includes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, is going to solve the majority of those problems. And then we're just going to tap into those in the right sequential order to drive a strong strategic outcome. And
Yeah,
if you can do that and then kind of decanter that into a couple of options, then you have a very, very scalable process. You have a very
yeah,
scalable system because then it's just like we know that if we have, for inflow, it's a great example. We know that if we have a business owner who sits with approximately 5 to 10 FTE, and the majority of that FTE is delivery focused, and they would have maybe 1 or 2 people from a marketing component, the sales are going to be wholly reliant on the founder. Right? That's
yeah,
just where they're going to sit. We know that the launch program, as an example, is going to solve a whole ton of their problems because it's going to pop them out and it's going to plug it with the right steps so that they've got oversight, but they don't necessarily have to be hands-on anymore. So
yeah,
it's about going, we know that you're going to be kept up at night about these things, and this solution solves these things, and this is how you use it, and this is the order you use it in, and it goes in that bucket. And then when you've done that, you can go over here. When you've done that, you can go over here.
yeah,
So a lot of the time we just sit and we go and we really labor on this. And one member who I absolutely adore has struggled really, really hard with this for the last few months. Just he's got a very technical product. Like it is super technical. There's so much to it. There's so many different components. And I've been working with him for about 5 months now, I think, and we've got it to a point where we have clear product, like clear and saleable product categories. So we
yeah,
can go, if you're here, we go there. And we just link those two. Once you've got that, then you can use that as a fulcrum. You can use it as a lever to paint a really positive future state because you
yeah.
just position the solution in between those two things. Like, here's now, here's where you want to be, here's the solution. We've got to go in here and then it will get us there.
Yeah, the whole productization thing I think is pretty heavily underrated as far as its importance, and it can
Yep.
be the major roadblock for a lot of businesses.
Yep.
And when I talk to business owners, I think one of the things they struggle with the most is how you productize doesn't actually create any limitations on what you can do, right?
No.
Um, because what they want to do is they want to do everything for everybody because they don't want to, they think about these outlier examples where they're like, oh, well, that person came to me and they wanted this, and so we did it for them. And they think about all these examples of times where they made money because they did everything. And they think about missing out on those things. The thing is, you don't have to miss out on any of them, right? But you will get more of the business you really want if you can be super clear about what problems you're solving and what it is that you're trying to do. So in an attempt to try and win all of the business, they end up not really being very focused. And so if you think about the clients where they've got a problem that's really causing them some pain, it's keeping them up at night, do they want somebody that can do everything to fix their problem? Or do they
Yeah.
want somebody that specializes in the thing that solves their problem?
Yeah.
Right? And so you don't have to give anything away, you don't have to give anything up. But by productizing on the real core challenges that your customers focus on, they feel more confident
Yeah.
in actually selecting you. They feel more clear around what the path is because you've cleared out all of the junk that doesn't help them,
Yeah.
right? You're by productizing and by being specific about it and niching and clearing out all the things you could do and just focusing on the things you should do for that one problem, if anything, that is a big part of what makes great sales process. Because all you're trying to do in sales process is, if they don't have information, help them understand information, which nowadays is rarely the problem.
Yeah.
But if they don't have it, give it to them. Show them how you do it specifically, right? And then just transfer certainty.
Yeah.
Like that's all
Yeah.
you're really trying to do. And the more options there are and the more mess there is, the less likely you are to be able to give someone certainty because they're confused. I think you and I have talked about this a lot over the last few years. But it's that whole, if you want to be everything to everybody, you'll end up being nothing to nobody.
100%.
Which doesn't work as a double negative, but it's a good saying anyway.
No, if we quadruple it out, it balances. So if we do,
I should have gone an extra no.
An extra no, but that's it. But that's it. Like we did that. Less is more. Like just 100%. Like less is more. Just you just need to simplify everything, and then when you think that you've got it, simplify it again. Like just keep going, because honestly, the biggest thing, the transferal of certainty is paramount. Like it is so paramount, and you can't do that if you spend so long trying to explain like one or two line items that for something that you do, because you end up just going into this hyperlogical state where you're like, oh, and it does this, and it does this, and it does this. And like my most effective sales calls is when someone goes, oh, what about this or this or this or this? And I just go, yes, yep, yep, we'll do that. That's part of it. Absolutely. I'm like, oh, you don't want to explain that for 50 minutes? No, we don't need to explain it for 50 minutes, because what we have solves that thing. Like if you want to go through, the innermost workings of it, okay, sure, we'll go down that rabbit hole. But if you hand on heart genuinely feel the need that you've got to do that in order to do this, then we need to completely rethink the conversation, because I haven't done something right. If that's where you are right now. The most effective things is when you can just, in 3 or 4 words, transfer the surety. Like just have surety about the thing that you have that you're solving. Just be like, yeah, of course it does that. Absolutely. There was one of my all-time greatest sales experiences was that I was talking to somebody about getting started in the coaching program for a while, and they just kept sending me these emails. Like it went on for months, right? And wouldn't get on the phone, like wouldn't do a Zoom session for me to actually have a conversation. They were like, and it was quite funny, because towards the end of it, she would send me these emails, and it would be like, can it do this, and this, and I ended up having like a 4-page email, and I didn't even go through it in like tons of detail. I skim read the whole thing, and I just went, okay, yeah, got it. And the single response, I just went, yes, yeah, that's fine. And she goes, oh, I got a phone call within 30 seconds. And she went, are you sure? And I went, yeah, absolutely. Like, I know that what you need is this stuff. Like we've mapped this out before. I know that this is the solution. And I just said to her, it's like, Miki, it's that simple. Like it is actually just that simple. Like you want this, we have this, it solves this. Do you want to do it? And she goes, oh yeah, absolutely, yeah, no, I do. And just straight away, like off she went. And it was just, having just the confidence behind it to say very simply, yeah, absolutely. Like, and that just transferred it straight over, and off she went. And
yeah,
to my knowledge, she's still going strong with that particular solution. So she's still doing really well there.
yeah. Well, sales is such a funny thing. It's a good friend of mine often says sales should be simple, but it's never easy.
Yeah.
What's your kind of overarching feeling on sales? Like, what do you sort of take away from it as the way you
It
summarize
should
it?
it should flow. Like it
Mm.
should be, you should be in a state of flow. Like it just, um, it is like, it is simple. Like if you zoom out, you look at it, it's a simple process. It gets, it gets complicated because the people component to it.
Hmm.
There's emotions, there's money attached to those emotions, and that's where, like, that's where the friction appears. Um, with anything here, with anything sales oriented, it should just be in flow. Like revenue should flow, and it's about just think about it like water. Just guide it. You just guide it through. Like don't form barriers where you don't need to. Like don't try and control something that's uncontrollable. Just flow within certain channels and just deepen those channels when you can. And what I mean
Mm.
by that is just, you know, fixate on just having like one or two really strong flows of revenue or sources of business or things like that. And then just focus on making those really seamless. And then just let it come in. And then don't move in with a strictness, but move in with a surety and firmness that you're going to guide somebody through. And then once you've done that, it will just flow, like it moves through quite easily. If you find that's not happening, then you've got to ask your question as to why. Like where are you adding friction to that process where it shouldn't be? Are you talking to the right people? Are those revenue flows that you've organized the right ones? They're attracting the right people. Have a think about that
Mm.
as well. But for me, it should be, you know, which is why I called the company Inflow. It should just flow. Like it should be relatively
Yeah.
seamless and it should just come through nice and smooth. And if we find that that's not happening, we just got to take a second and just have a look and figure out why that's the case.
Yeah.
Um,
So many people focus so heavily on the like, how do we motivate someone to move forward rather than those friction points that are stopping them from moving forward, I think so often. You
yeah,
know, what are the little, how often do you go in and talk to someone about their sales process? Go have a real good look at it. And you just find three or four spots where customers get stuck because it's hard for them.
yeah,
It's like, oh, when they come through to this point, we've qualified them, we've sent them a proposal, blah, 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 blah. Before we move ahead, they've got to fill in this form. And you go and look at the form, and it's like an application to university.
yeah,
And it's like, okay, so why do you think everyone seems to be stopping at this point?
mm,
What are you doing to help them fill out the form? Do you already have some of this information? What parts of this information are absolutely essential
yeah,
before they can start the next part of the process? And most of the time, it's like there'll be 10 field, you know, the amount of times I've seen someone with 10 fields in that random form that they're not even using. That they were like, "Oh, well, we wanted
why?
to do this reporting for this thing," and I'm like, "Well, are you though?
Yeah,
No. Well, then why are you making it harder for your customer?"
yeah,
You see it all the time, and those.
yeah,
I think that's a really important point you make around. You have to you kind of have to look at both sides, not
yeah,
just how do I motivate them to move forward, but how do I remove the blockages,
yeah,
right? How do I
yeah.
remove those friction points? I think that's yeah, critical.
That's exactly it. And you know, if you look at this as well, like the majority of business owners who have been going for, so the majority of business owners that are fairly well established, but they've been going for, let's say, a couple of years, they have a good solution. They have a decent solution. Otherwise, they wouldn't have had that tenure. So we look at that and we go, okay, we obviously have something that's good, um, but you will be throwing up these hurdles that you arbitrarily think that you need. Right. So it's like that reporting example is a great one. It's like, and we've got somebody at the moment who suffers from this. They love a good form, absolutely love a good form. There's forms upon forms upon forms. And I saw it and I screamed and I went, I've looked at this for 30 seconds and I'm not remotely inclined to tell you all of this information. Like it just doesn't make sense. I don't understand why we need it now. So let me help me understand why we need it. And then, full disclosure, if I think that's really dumb, I'm going to tell you it's really dumb. And I told her it was really dumb. And I said, just get rid of it. Like, it's not doing you any service. Like, you can get all this stuff when you onboard the person. Like, you don't need
Mm.
it now. Like, wait until onboarding. At this stage, like, you're going in for, a kiss. You haven't even bought dinner yet. Like, just like, let's take a step back, and you can get this stuff. And even if you think it's integral to get this as part of your sales process, that's fine. That's absolutely. We can do it in better ways. We 100% do this in easier ways. And that one form can be a 5-minute conversation on the phone. Like, you can just literally just be like, hey, we saw that you want to look at this. Let's just grab some details and figure that out. So just make sure that you're in the best place.
Yeah.
Not put it at the beginning where they look at this and they just immediately get turned off.
Yeah.
People are stressed out, time poor. They don't want to have to do. They don't. You can't get them to do something unless they absolutely know what's going to be on the other end of that exercise. If there's ambiguity or uncertainty around, what happens after you collect that much information, they're not going to give it to you. They just won't. There's no trust there. So, like, if you have to get that stuff, and you have to, and it's integral to how you operate as a business, thread it subtly through your sales process. You collect it over time, and just make sure you're just not shoving massive hurdles in front of people to do it. Nothing is more frustrating than when you go and book a time with somebody to have a conversation about what it is that they do, and you get directed to a Calendly form, and you have to fill out all of those pages. And then you get to
What's
the passive
maiden name?
Yeah, and then you get to the passive aggressive one at the very end, which is just like, will you show up? But they ask it in a really aggro way. They're like, would you, and you're like, well, yeah, like, because I want to talk to you. Like, this is why I'm booking it.
Make it easy for people to
Yeah.
buy from you. But that piece around like, when do you ask and why do you ask? I think a really simple way to think about it is, if your customer's looking at something that you're asking them in a form, it could be in a DM, it could be in a LinkedIn DM or a Facebook DM or something, wherever you're asking for it. If they're looking at it and they would think to themselves, why do they need to know that now? Remove it.
Get rid of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Serves no purpose.
If somebody with no context, somebody with no idea how the inner workings of your business works, if they look at something you're asking and they couldn't immediately figure out why you're asking it, don't ask it then. I had this conversation with a client who is essentially like a buyer's agency, right, for real estate. Because they were getting pushback, right? They have an offshore resource, and they were getting pushback because they were asking, with an offshore resource who's proactively doing outbound to, content downloads and stuff, they were asking about how much savings the person has.
Yeah,
right?
I'll pass. Yeah.
Okay, but right, if you think of it from a customer's perspective, it's like, how much have you got to invest? How much have you got in saving? Or sorry, how much are you looking to buy for, and how much you got in savings? Okay, some random person calls me up, honestly, from overseas, some places where I get scam calls from sometimes.
Yeah.
And one of the first things they're asking me is that, resistance. However, if you were filling in a form about property investment and that form asked for that information, would you give it?
Yes, you would.
Yeah,
Yes.
because it makes logical sense, right?
Yeah.
I'm inquiring about property investment. Those are two things I would obviously answer. So those are two things that, even though it's super early in the process, in that specific customer example, I would ask those in a form, right? I might not ask them a whole heap of other stuff. There'd be heaps of things I might cut out, but like location you're looking to invest, how much are you looking to invest, how much have you got in savings, how much do you earn?
Yep.
Right? Household income, or are you a single? Like, some of these things that are probably quite personal things to ask over the phone actually make a lot of sense in a form, in an inquiry form in that particular industry. So it's just that, like, step back. If I'm the client, I'm the customer, I'm looking at this thing, do I immediately know why you're asking me that?
Yeah.
And if I do, then it's fine.
Yeah.
Right? So another example of this. Do you know that if you have in your inquiry form a section for self-reported attribution that is, how did you hear about us, or where did you hear about us, right?
Yep.
Almost all of the data suggests that that has very little to zero impact on your conversion rate of form fills,
Huh. No.
right? So
Yeah.
most of the data will tell you that
Yeah.
when somebody's filling in a form, the more fields you have, the
Yeah.
lower your conversion rates.
Yeah.
But that is only a portion of the story. It depends on what the fields are,
Yeah.
right? It
Yeah.
depends on the context. It depends on the customer going, do I believe that at this stage, where I'm at in my certainty, where I'm at in my buying process, does it make sense for me to answer this in order for me to move this process forward? Am I ready to give that information at this stage of the process? And if the answer is yes, it helps me to move this forward, or it's kind of inconsequential to give the information, quite often it has no impact or can even have positive impact. Rarely, but occasionally.
Yeah.
Like, so I used to work for a big international student recruitment business that did foundations for students all over the world. $500 million worth of students a year. And we would have these forms that were application forms, right? Our most serious inquiry form. You're literally applying to the university. And some of those forms were 50, 60 fields long and included adding documentation like photocopy of your passport and heaps of stuff.
Yeah.
And some of those had better conversion rates, right, than some of our really innocuous, basic inquiry forms,
Yeah.
right? Which, you know, if somebody clicks something that says apply, they're
Yeah.
probably expecting a lot more fields and to put a lot more work in. So they're maybe not clicking it in the first place as often, but
When they
you
do,
know, it's just that whole
yeah.
expectation. Does it fucking make sense?
Yeah.
Right? Which is a very long way, I suppose, to give my side of that.
Well, no, that's it. Like, does it make sense to get this now? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Like, and if the answer is it's absolutely fine, then of course leave it there. Don't touch it. But what's very common is people don't they think about what they should put in there, and then they just chuck it in, and it doesn't make sense. Like, it doesn't make sense to have that much information. Just think about, like, what is the bare ass minimum you need to get? Like, what is the BAM that you need to get for that particular thing to just go to this next point? Hold it there, and then when you've got that, simplify it again. Then you're good. Like, off you trot. But the buyer's agent one's a great example of, like, for that specific industry and that persona, absolutely you'd have to have that. And it's an awesome example as well, because some people are getting inherently uncomfortable about asking about money, talking about money early in the sales process. But it's a great example of when it makes sense to, absolutely you ask that question, but only when it makes sense to.
Yep. And it can flip the other way. Like, I've seen B2B inquiry forms for things like software and that sort of stuff, where it's like, what is your budget to spend on this software, right? And if I'm a B2B buyer, I don't want to answer that question. I don't know. I don't know yet whether I want to buy your thing. I'm not telling you how much money I've got to spend. I haven't seen any of your pricing yet. You know, like, sometimes it is too early, sometimes it is wrong, and sometimes it's not. But it's just that true customer centricity. I like to think of it as like customer empathy. Can you put yourself in their shoes and be them and go, does this make sense? What's the best thing for me in how I want to buy? And if you can do that, like most, you know, coming back to the point we were talking about early on about, like, you know, building sales processes. Like, that's really probably the fundamental perspective for building a sales process is, how does the customer want to buy?
Yep.
What's going to make sense for them and what's going to be easy for them? So you can almost get out of their way, give them exactly what they need when they need it.
Yeah.
Get out of their way and let them buy as easy as possible.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, that's it. Like, just exactly that.
Yeah.
Just when they're ready, just let them go. That's it.
Revenue should flow, right?
It should just fly. That's it.
Should be a
Yeah,
nice inflow of
that's
revenue.
that's right. You got it. You got it.
um, Talk to me about sales process. I hate that as a setup for a question, by the way, the talk to me setup. So I'll try and avoid it a little bit more. But anyway, even though I hate it, talk to me about sales process. What's your approach to building a sales process?
So it's always a little bit. We're going to tie back into some of the stuff that we just chatted about. Like it's always a little bit different per company, like per person. But the key things that we just got to map out is there's you want to chunk it into a handful of steps, if that many. Right? It doesn't. You don't need to have a step and then a step and then a step and a step and then a step. Like it actually needs to be. I'm a big fan of a very linear sales process, like a very straightforward, simple. We have and just think, just cast back to the old diagram of that pipe of that pipeline. Right, we do want to make sure that we have a big bucket at the top, and then we trickle through the right people when it makes sense to have those conversations. So, for me, especially in the service space, we want to look at just mapping out maybe 4, potentially 5 key stages that we guide somebody through. And then we create specific steps for each of those within each of those stages, depending on the client that they serve. Now, some people, have, some business owners will want to move straight into what a solution setting is called, right? So that's just a face-to-face session where you sit down and you just talk outcome, you just talk shop. Others just want a little bit more qualification up front. So you do like an initial health check or a discovery call or a qualification call up front. You can pop one of those in. It's really down to what makes sense from a buying from a customer perspective, especially if you look at the 2 different categories. If you look at B2B and B2C, they're going to be a little bit different. B2B, you probably want another couple of steps in there. So what works really quite well is you have like an initial triage, which is where all of your new inbound leads typically go into. And then you look at that and then you go, okay, we're going to sort through those to make sure that we've got the right level of intent, not just curiosity, but we actually have some intent, because they're going to move into an onshore conversation and we're going to have a chat with them around what their best next steps are. Like, do we go into a solution setting? Do we go into a referral? Do we engage with them at a later time because they're in there by accident? So we want to look at the next step, which would be a discovery call. Then we move them into a solution call, which is, okay, now that we know who you are and what you're looking for, let's create something awesome together and show you how to leverage the thing that we do. And then from there, they either move into it, or you just have one more step, which is just to kind of finalize a couple of different points. That's a bit different for everyone. Some call that a getting started call. Some like to call it best next steps. For the client that I mentioned before, who has a really technical sales process, we actually call that a crisis meeting, because that's normally when it's gone off the rails. They normally can get somebody started once they've created the roadmap. If they move to that next step, it's because a stakeholder has thrown a curveball in at the last minute, and we've got to address that. Or there's something shown up topically that's not it. Like they had one of the clients that they were serving had a big commercial accident on site, which stopped them from progressing into becoming a client. So they had to go into crisis meeting to meet that. But so I suppose to answer your question, you have to look at, 1, what makes sense. 2, what layers of, like, what areas do we need to apply friction as part of the sales process? Like, where do we need to speed it up? Where do we need to slow it down? And it's always a fine line between those 2 things, because sales, as you know, and we've chatted about a lot, is all about momentum. It's all about velocity. And it takes time to ramp up. So we want to make sure that we're super efficient with that ramp up time. But you don't want to have, a 10-step sales process. Like I don't know anybody who needs that many, unless it's a very, very long sales cycle. If you want,
Yeah.
if you want a 14-day sales cycle, then 5 steps will do the trick. Like
Yep.
it can be that simple. For others who, working with a member at the moment who has a B2C sales cycle, realistically, that's 2 steps. Like it's just, it's new inbound lead, straight to booking call, and you close on the booking call. But
Yeah.
that's it. It's down to the thing that you're selling. How big it is as well will often dictate how long your sales cycle needs to be. Yeah, the rule of thumb is the more money that's involved, the slightly longer the sales process is going to be.
Yep. And the more decision makers as well.
It's more decision makers. That's it. Like if
Yep.
you've got, if your decision making unit consists of 10 people, all of whom don't have overlapping schedules, it's going to take you longer to get commercial, congruent buy-in versus if you just sat with a single business owner and you're like, cool, this is the thing, this is what it does, this is how much it costs, let's go.
By the way, one of the reasons why I love selling to SMEs is I quite often get to just sell to a single decision maker.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so much easier. Yeah, those big corporate, 5 to 10 people decision making units where everyone's really got a say. Everyone wants to be involved now, probably more than they used to because they can just jump on the Zoom and then do no work to move it forward in between Zoom meetings. Has made things definitely more challenging. That piece you mentioned around momentum, I think that's really interesting as far as where do we want to apply friction, which sounds a little counterintuitive. Where do we want to slow things down? I think like a good sort of metaphor for it is like a steam train.
Yeah.
Your biggest problem is when it stops entirely.
Yeah.
Right? And there'll be parts in your sales process where if they don't go slow through that part, they'll come to a complete stop, and then getting them going again is really hard. So it's like, where are the turns where I need to slow this train down a bit while it navigates that turn, but I can keep it going forward so it doesn't come to a stop, and then speed things up again, I think is a good way to think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I think isn't spoken enough about is, especially in B2B sales, you have when they're actively in your sales pipeline, when they're in your sales process, you have an intent curve. If you think about the adoption curve, is a really, really good example of this. The reason you want momentum and you want controlled momentum and you want to leverage it is that when it stops, it's really, really hard to reignite it. Like it's really, really hard. And the steam train metaphor is bang on. You're up against it. So if you don't capitalize on the momentum that you have while they're in there, you're going to do yourself a disservice. You're going to do them a disservice. And it's not. And this is something that I had to train somebody on not so long ago because they thought that the sales cycle that they were in was high pressure. And I had to really challenge that assumption and really challenge that conception of it. And I went, no, it's not high pressure. But what you need to understand is that the people that we look after have incredibly split focus. So that when they're here and they're with us and we're having these conversations, they're high intent. And if we don't work with that, and we don't work with that window of opportunity that we have to actually give them a solution, then it's going to drop off a cliff very fast. And then it's really, really hard to re-engage with them. And ultimately their problems don't get fixed because they just then go back into the minutiae of their day-to-day life and they're just completely stressed out. And what we're trying to solve is that exact thing. Like, how do we give them an easier way to do what they're doing? And so yes, while when they're in the sales cycle, we want it to transact in 5 days. Absolutely we do. But that's just because the window of opportunity that we have. That's the time that they're able to give us to actually have this conversation. It's not because we're putting the screws on them. It's that's our window of opportunity. So we've got to capitalize on that. So we have to move fast. We have to make sure that we're all over it. And if we can't reconcile with that, then we have to ask the question, is this the right sale for you? And that's fine if that's not. If you'd rather work on something that goes for longer, that's okay. But you just need to understand that that's the reality. That's just, we're fighting for attention. We're fighting to keep them engaged with us. And if we don't use that intent the right way, then we're going to really struggle to obviously get the outcome, but also help them with an awesome solution.
Yep. And ultimately, if you believe you have a great solution and you
Yeah,
believe you actually can help them, which is, I think if you don't believe that, you have some product work to do or you shouldn't be in business.
100%.
But if
Yeah,
you believe that you can truly help them, then you just have to remember always that if you don't sell to them, you can't help them.
yeah,
So what's the best way for you to make sure that they make a decision, positive or negative, right?
yeah,
And and no decision is the worst.
yeah,
Expensive no's are the ones where they never get back to you and you spend a lot of time and effort managing the pipeline that was never going to happen.
yeah,
Uh, but
yeah,
getting them to make that decision is the best thing for them and it's the best thing for you. So sometimes you just have to plan for it. It's pressure if you're like, make a decision now. It's not pressure if you're taking them through a logical series of steps that ends in a decision,
yeah,
right? And ends in one quickly. Okay, so um, I think that is a good point to kind of wrap on because um, there's so much that we could talk about, and honestly, I could keep this going for hours and hours and hours. Um, but we will have you back, and we can talk more sales psychology, all those things in depth. But anybody that has the level of knowledge that I know you do around this particular area, you know, how to get people to make decisions, um, how to sell, how to organize revenue operations, and those sorts of things. Uh, I typically find is somebody who is pretty self-taught or self-motivated to learn.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and so I ask everybody that comes on this show, um, where do you get your information from? And do you have any recommendations for us? Books, podcasts, etc.
Yeah, 100%. So I'm a big book fan. So I will just read and read and read. And um, I get incredible tunnel vision on the topic. Like if I find something that I want to get my teeth into, I will disappear down a rabbit hole. And, you know,
Mm.
2 dozen books later, I'm like, yeah, got it. Okay, let's go. And I just find and this is one of the really awesome things about this space in that revenue optimization and revenue operations is a hugely emerging thing. Like it's going to be moving into $1 billion industry very soon, if not already. And yeah, there are a lot of some very clever people who have been doing some work in and around this sales enablement and space for the last 2 decades. So for me, I just there are one of the ones that has taught me an incredible amount was actually Mark Roberge, who was the VP of sales at HubSpot, and he was instrumental in taking them to 100 million with how he looked at their revenue optimization, their sales enablement piece. So
Mm.
any content that you can find of his, I would highly recommend. Very smart guy. Again, almost the anti-salesperson, engineer by trade, looked at sales and just went, I can make this the 2.0 version, create some awesome stuff for there. So highly recommend any of his content. Tom Williams, who is a B2B buyer coach based out of the States. He's been instrumental in developing my understanding of what a buyer's journey should look like, what a sales process should look like. He's a very smart man. Got some great literature. I'd highly recommend getting into that. There's a lot of good content around how to build the stuff out, but there's nothing better than a lot of the published work that's out there at the moment. So I would highly recommend Mark Roberge's stuff. I would also have a look at uh, who was the Daniel Pink to sell his human.
Yeah,
Really
love that
good
one.
book on just how innately human it is to sell. Like, and it's something that has shifted the way a lot of sales conversations have gone. There's also a very smart man over in the States called Michael Pantalini, who wrote some very good book on how to create, how to tap into people's reasons for doing things. And ultimately, that's what sales is. It's tapping into their reasons to use your solution. And if you have a good
Yep.
solution and you can tap into those things, then you've got a winning formula. So for
That
me,
is that's Instant Influence, right?
that's instant influence. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
which is a book that you recommended to me maybe 2 years ago, and I read and absolutely loved. So
Yeah.
can confirm, great book. Definitely everyone should read it. Okay, and so to wrap up, anybody that's listened to this that wants to reach out, where can they find you and what might they reach out about?
So they can find me through three different places. One is the website, which is in-flow.com.au. Next, just chuck me a good old message on LinkedIn. So you'll see me. I'm Hugh Hall Sales Simplified on LinkedIn. Or just shoot me an email. Just go straight into the generic inbox, which is hello@inflow.com.au. I've got one of my rock stars manning that. Just make sure that we answer everything that comes through the door. So really what we do, if there's anybody there that is finding that they're getting stuck within their sales function and they're not quite sure how to move past that point, super common, happens an awful lot. What we do is we seek to serve and plug that gap. So you can step away from it a little bit. We've got a couple of ways that we do that. We look at creating the right sales process. We look at making sure you have the right systems in place. And then if you need some help with some bums on seats, we help augment that as well. So really what we look at is how can you move into a space within your business and within your world that makes more sense rather than just selling your time, because that's a limited input output equation. There's only so far you can go with it before you're just cooked. So we want to make sure that you can move into the next variation of your business in a really sustainable but simple way. And that's what we focus on with Inflow. It's just making sure your revenue optimization is just nice and neat and it just flows. It's just nice and straightforward.
Love it. Thank you so much for joining us. Anybody who wants an intro to Hugh, I'm more than happy to make that as well. You can just DM me if you're already connected. But thanks for joining us, and we'll have to have you back to talk some more sales stuff.
100%. It's really, really, really good being here. Thanks for finding the time and getting me on board. It's good to chat.
See you next time.
All right, Tara. Bye.